Bon, alors j'ai déjà présenté une partie des dispositifs, donc du coup vous ne serez pas très surpris des acteurs qui interviennent côté politique publique en France. Vous avez évidemment le niveau national, ça va essentiellement être le ministère de l'Intérieur et le ministère de l'Environnement sur ces questions. Qui vont définir tout le cadre des dispositifs que je vous ai décrits tout à l'heure. Quel est le support juridique d'un plan de prévention des risques, qu'est-ce qui est éligible à être subventionné par le Fonds de prévention des risques naturels majeurs, par exemple. Donc tout ça, c'est plutôt défini au niveau national. Et ensuite, l'État, il a des services déconcentrés, donc de niveau régional ou départemental, qui vont être chargés de décliner toutes ces politiques. Alors en France, on est beaucoup organisé par département, avec à la tête de chaque département un représentant de l'État qui est le préfet. C'est pas mentionné sur ces slides parce que c'était un peu évident, mais il a déjà un rôle de coordination de tous ces différents acteurs au sein de l'État pour faire avancer ces sujets-là. Et puis il a un certain nombre de rôles, notamment en matière de gestion de crise, lorsque de fait une inondation se produit. Et également, on y reviendra tout à l'heure, sur tout ce qui est information préventive et culture du risque, il y a un certain nombre de choses qui sont portées par les préfectures aussi. De manière plus orientée, ministère de l'Environnement, ce que vous avez au niveau des services déconcentrés, donc vous avez les DREAL qui est la structure au niveau régional à laquelle j'appartiens, et puis vous avez la direction départementale des territoires et de la mer qui sont le niveau départemental. Vous voyez qu'ils se répartissent un peu la déclinaison des différents outils que j'ai décrits tout à l'heure. Les plans de prévention des risques sont plutôt élaborés au niveau départemental, alors que la stratégie et ce genre de choses sont plutôt suivies par le niveau régional. Et vous avez aussi dans les niveaux régionaux des services qui sont spécialisés dans la prévision des crues. Alors l'État, il agit aussi donc en soutien, alors notamment c'est le niveau départemental beaucoup qui joue ce rôle-là, en soutien des collectivités dans la part qui leur incombe, donc que ce soit en expertise qui peut être en éclairage réglementaire ou en financement. Les collectivités, elles, celles qui vont porter des projets de territoire, pour reprendre le terme proposé par le ministère, par exemple au travers des programmes d'action de prévention des inondations que je vous présentais tout à l'heure. Et puis également en appliquant les obligations réglementaires que je mentionnais tout à l'heure, issues des plans de prévention des risques, dans leur manière de gérer les politiques en matière d'urbanisme à l'échelle de leur territoire. Je ne vais pas revenir tout de suite sur le rôle des citoyens puisque ce sera l'objet de questions plus tard. Je vais peut-être juste revenir sur ce qui peut être aussi fait au niveau des entreprises. Alors là, je vous ai mis un extrait d'une plaquette que vous pouvez retrouver sur le site de la DREAL Normandie qui présente un peu toutes les actions qu'une entreprise qui est exposée au risque inondation peut mettre en œuvre pour limiter les conséquences potentielles, alors soit humaines, soit en perte de valeur, soit en création d'accidents ou de pollution accidentelle pour leur site. Donc ça va d'actions très simples ou d'actions aussi organisationnelles, comme la mise en place de plans de mise en sécurité du personnel, jusqu'à des choses qui sont des investissements un peu plus lourds, mais qui, dans certains cas, peuvent s'avérer nécessaires.
Okay, so in the UK, we have quite a complex issue of dealing with it. You may not be able to see all that, but I'm sure you'll get it later on. But the important thing is that we have the government at the top, and then we have they make the policy. We have 12 regional flood and coastal committees who operate around the country. And the chairman of that report into government. So the role of these regional flood and coastal committees is to guide the local people into the catchments and the likely impacts of climate change, which we've heard about, and advice given and consent to programs that will happen in their parts of the country. Then we have the county councils or unitary local authorities. They were given the lead in local flood following the floods of 2007, and they are the county councils. Then next to that, under them, we have the district and borough councils. This is interesting. In Kent, we have 12 of them. And then underneath that, we have something like 320 parishes. And they are working independently of themselves, and then they pass information up. But that's quite complex, getting all that information up. And then we have flood groups that are working sometimes in conjunction with parish councils and sometimes not. So there are different issues associated with that. Then we have internal drainage boards, which in Kent there are 5, and there are something like 100 in the UK in total. And their responsibility is looking at water levels in low-lying areas. Some of them are quite complex, and they have a lot of pumping stations, multi-million-pound pumping stations that pump water, places like the Romney Marsh and in Lincolnshire. Very costly to run, but play a crucial role in dealing with water. Then we've got the water and sewerage companies who are dealing with all the problems associated with that. In England, we have a lot of outdated sewerage systems that were built in Victorian times and are now really not fit for purpose. And it's quite staggering. I found out a few months ago that when we have floods, some 80% of the water in these systems is flood water and a lot less of the actual sewage. We have a lot of rural areas in England, and when we get flooding, we get raw sewage in the water as well. So it's a complicated issue. But it's really great to notice that the water and sewerage companies now are trying to address this problem in order to make things a lot better. We've got a lot of infill, we've got lots of building work going on, and they're looking at innovative ways of trying to store water. It's also interesting, I think, that we're now talking about flooding and drought in the same sentence, which we weren't doing years ago. We're desperate to get water out to sea, but we really ought to be conserving it, because with all the building work that's going on in the UK, by 2070 in the southeast, they reckon there will be a crucial water shortage. So we do need to think seriously about how we can deal with that. I stood in a field in 1979 when we were told that this would be a reservoir for Canterbury. That field is still a field. So we do need to tackle that. But there is a lot of movement with water and sewerage companies. You would think that with the lead local authorities being the Kent County Councils, there would be good communication with the Highways Authority. There are issues associated with this. We get a lot of water runoff from highways that goes into unmaintained ditches, and we have problems with something called riparian ownership, which are the ownership of local ditches that farmers used to maintain. They don't maintain any longer due to lack of labour force, and there are certainly a number of issues that we are tackling to deal with how we deal with the highways. And then also, maybe it should be at the top of the list, is the property and the owners and the individuals who are responsible for their own flood risk. I think there's still a feeling in the UK that when flooding comes, it's somebody else's responsibility. Well, in some cases it may well be, but there are other occasions when the homeowners need to take their own protection. A number of properties have been protected by various schemes in the UK, but there are a number of properties that haven't been because they don't qualify for the relevant funding, particularly in rural areas, small communities. And as has already been mentioned, now that we're seeing groundwater, surface water problems, and this flash flooding when we get these horrendous storms, and we've seen a number of communities that have never been flooded before have been flooded in the last couple of years or so. So it's quite a complex system that we have to try and pull all this lot together. I would have to say that in some respects there is a lot of good communication. In other places there is room for improvement, let me put it that way. The issue about how we all work together is, if somebody's got the direct answer to that, I'd be delighted to hear from you. But it is a problem. There is progress, but local authorities are under particular pressure in the UK now for all sorts of other things. We've had the dreaded coronavirus. We have had leaving Europe, which has caused problems. And also some local authorities and the EA are struggling to retain staff as well. due to other issues and people going into the private sector. So lots of things to think about. So that just gives you an idea of what actually happens in the UK.